when I don't know if I should call you Shamla there, if I should say Mrs. Bharadwaj, but when I was contacted to come and talk about digital library projects, I was really excited because um, there's a certain misconception about library work or librarianship, and that it involves only a certain kind of work, and typically that being assisting library patrons locate print materials or books or checking them out from the library. But I hope this talk will dispel that notion and also give insight into a different aspect of library work or librarianship that is very rewarding from the perspectives of teaching, learning, and conducting research. I've been engaged with digital library projects for most of my library career. That is actually what drew me into librarianship, and something that I have learned a lot from. So in today's presentation, I will give a brief overview of some of the benefits of the digitization. That's the starting point of any digital library project. There are lots of things that one needs to think about when implementing such projects. So the types of objects that one wants to digitize and make available, metadata or the descriptive information that gets attached to these digital objects so that they can be found easily online, what kinds of access, the labor involved, as in who is going to be doing the work in terms of putting together this digital library project. If there are any copyright considerations, if there are any privacy or ethical considerations that one needs to look into, and also the actual act of digital preservation, that is preserving these digital objects for posterity. I'll share some examples of digital collections and digital libraries. There are also other hubs for discovery of digital collections. So I will share some examples of those. And then also touch upon a couple of projects which are referred to as digital humanities or digital scholarship projects that of digital objects or digitized objects in order to further research, especially of the humanities and science-related projects. So what are some of the benefits of digitization? So the main idea behind conducting digitization is to minimize handling of rare or fragile materials. So for example, if there is a rare book, like a very old book, and if its pages are getting very brittle, or if they might be tearing or falling apart, you want to preserve the physical book for a longer period of time. By making a digital copy of that book and making that available, you're minimizing the physical handling of that particular book. And so if somebody can take a look at the book online, if they can read it online, if they can conduct their research online, then you can preserve the physical book for a longer period of time. And of course, you can make an exception if somebody actually wants to look at the original work under very specific instances. But then digital objects, you also provide digital preservation, and I'll go into that a little into detail in a few slides. But that's basically preserving the digital copies or the digital versions of the print materials. And by making these digital objects available in an online digital environment, you're also providing access to those materials to a wider global audience. So for example, those people who might not be able to travel to another country or to go to a museum in another country, if that, so for example, like the British Library in the UK, they've made many of their works in their collections available in their online digital collection. So anybody sitting in India or even me in the US, we can access their online collection, look at the works that they have, and just learn more about those objects. Because without online access or a digital version to look at, we don't know what is in their collections. Digital library projects also allow the building of collaborative partnerships. So for example, a library or a museum may realize that there is another library or a museum that has a similar collection. And so the two might come together and build a digital library with both institutions contributing to a single digital collection. So again, that allows for a partnership, that allows for better research or understanding of the materials that are available. And also, some of these digitized materials can be included in teaching and learning environments as well. Originally, or at least when I was a graduate student pursuing my degree in art history, initially we used to use slides and a slide projector to project these images in the classroom. But then once the digital or digitized versions of those slides were available, it was easy to just grab those digital images and put them in a PowerPoint and make those available in a classroom environment. So the next few slides, I will review some of the considerations for implementing digital library projects. So there are a variety of things that one needs to look at and think about and plan for before actually conducting the act of digitization. So one needs to identify what to digitize, and it's best to define the scope of what your digital library or a digital collection is going to be. And that could either be like a general collection with highlights of things that you have in your collection. And when I mean collection, it could either be a library collection or a collection in an archive or special collection. And the concepts or the principles are the same when implementing a digital library. So defining the scope, what it is that you want to highlight, you may have a certain, there may be certain strengths in your physical collections which you want to highlight. There may be some collections that are very heavily used. And so again, you want to provide access to those objects in a digital environment. But there may be some objects that might be or certain collections that might be more ready for digitization than some others. There might be some objects that might be falling apart, that might be too brittle, that might need some conservation treatment. And so, it's best to try and look also for collections that might be ready for digitization in that sense. But also, if you want to try and promote the use of hidden collections. So hidden collections are those that may be, in a museum collection or in a library collection, which nobody knows about. I mean, it was acquired by those institutions at some point, but those collections haven't been processed, or somehow you want to try and provide visibility to those collections. And digitization affords the most use. So depending on what kind of institution you have, there might be a variety of objects that you might want to consider digitizing. So typically, so in the column on the left, these are the typical types of objects that exist in museum or special collections. And there could be photographs, slides, audio recordings, video recordings, ephemera. So ephemera is pamphlets, minutes of meetings, information sheets, etc. So all of these can be digitized, again, depending on what it is that you want to include in your collection. But more recently, with the increasing use of digital technology, more digital objects are being created, like, for example, the photographs that we capture on our phones, or software that's written, for which no analog counterpart or paper or a print format exists. And so these objects are especially fragile because if the original files get corrupted, then there is the risk of losing that digital object. And so unless there's a copy of that digital object that already exists somewhere, then you might be in better shape. But mostly these are a little more tricky to manage or preserve digitally. Now, so with digitizing items, it is important to follow certain standards to achieve higher quality of images for sharing online and also for future digital preservation. So this way, one can also make new copies from originals at different resolutions depending on what the need might be. So this is a chart that is taken from the Library of Congress technical specifications for digitization. And as you can see, there are different resolutions and bit depths, etc., that one should use when making a digital object of an analog item. And so there are different specifications for printed text or for music or maps. And if you look at it, for maps, for example, the resolution is slightly lower because maps tend to be much bigger physically, whereas and they don't have here for slides, but slides require higher resolution just because they are smaller in size. Now these are similarly there are metadata schemas or standardized structures within which descriptive information about the digital objects needs to be captured. And there are various structures that are available depending on the nature of the originating collection. So I've indicated here, like, for example, and you may be familiar with this. You may have heard of the MARC schema, which is used in library catalogs that captures information about books and things. But then for visual materials, there's something called VRA core, and essentially this identifies things like the title field, a field for description, a field for contributor, things like that. But again, these are all very standardized structures that are used. There's also something called controlled vocabularies, and these are essentially lists of standardized names for subjects, artist names, and even for medical terms. So using standardized terms, it allows for consistency in how descriptive information is included in the digital asset management system. But it also allows for more effective discovery when one is searching for items that match the search terms entered. So for example, the image on the left is an image of, these are all the various control vocabularies that exist. So you can see there's one for art and architecture, there's one for cultural objects, there's something called land, which is union list of artist names, etc. And the image on the right is for an entry for Syed Haider Raza. He was a modern Indian artist. And this record is actually taken from the union list of artist names. And so in this record, what they do is they provide a standardized way in which this artist name should be recorded. They provide a note, which is basically, a little bit of biographical information about the artist if it's available. But then they also provide variations in how the name sometimes gets recorded, but it's essentially referring to the same artist. It provides information about the artist's nationality, what sort of role this artist played, and the preferred term. So if you're describing this person, it should be an artist and not necessarily a painter. Tells you the gender, it tells you the birth and death places, and it also provides some information about the artists or the contemporary artists of his time. So this is all very informative, but like I said, it allows for more consistency in how these names are recorded. So there are additional considerations that one needs to take, and I won't go into too much detail about this, but I wanted to include it in here. So depending on what kinds of collections and things you want to provide access to, you also have to think about what kind of access restrictions you want to provide. So for example, the collection that you want to put online, do you want to make it publicly available? That means anybody with that internet or the web address can look it up. They can even Google it and find the digital collection. Or do you want to provide some access restrictions? That is, if you want that collection to be visible just to your institution, or just to a certain number of people, like researchers, for example. There might be some copyright considerations. So if an object is under copyright, then unless you seek permission from the copyright holder, it's advisable not to put that object up in the digital collection, because otherwise you might get sued. There are also considerations for labor costs, and how are you going to make sure that you have sustainable funding to provide the labor for managing and sustaining the digital library projects. And one also needs to think about what platform one wants to use in order to make the digital collections accessible online. And I also wanted to touch upon privacy and ethics, because this is becoming more and more important, because with the availability of digital content available online, it's important to remember not to digitize objects that might have confidential content in them. So for example, social security numbers, which is very specific to the US, but equivalent of that might be like an Aadhaar card number that you just don't want to make available online, because somebody might try and misuse that information. You should try and avoid including personal addresses or contact information, bank account information, especially if somebody has donated their personal collection and there might be such detail available there. And also one has to remember that not all information can be digitized or provided access to. So for example, here in the US, and especially as information pertains to the Native Americans, a lot of their traditions, they're not in print format. Some of them are in oral format. And some of those traditions are specific just for their communities or for their tribes. And so even if they allow for providing a digital access traditions, one has to be very mindful about how you provide access to them. And this is the final slide for consideration. And what we mean by digital preservation is preserving the digital objects for posterity. And so that involves taking regular backups of the digital objects. And ideally, one should keep 3 copies of backups in geographically distributed locations, so that even if one server goes down somewhere, you still have 2 copies of your work available to you. And digital preservation also requires a very different workflow and different tools that are needed to ensure the integrity of the digital files. Because again, digital files are very fragile in that they can get corrupted very easily. And so, one has to make sure that in order to preserve those for posterity, those files are going to be useful in the future. So now I will share some examples of digital collections. So let me get out of this presenting mode. So this example is, so the University of Washington Libraries, they have a South Asian oral history project that they conducted many years ago. And by this, what they do is they've interviewed many South Asians who live in the US, in the state of Washington, and they've provided access to those interviews through their platform. So for example, some of you may have heard of Pramila Jaipal. She is now a US senator, but this interview was captured back in 2008. And this is all the metadata that I was mentioning. This is all the descriptive information about the individual that they provided access to. Who the person is. Here are some of the subjects, or these are the control vocabularies that are used to provide access. Who the interviewer is, if there are any restrictions that apply, right statements, things like that. In addition to the photograph that they've made available, there's a video recording and audio recording, as well as an interview transcript that is available here for anybody to use. So I'll play just a few seconds of this video, and just for you to see how this works in the digital collection.
This is Amy Bott here with Pramila Jayapal in Seattle, Washington on July 20th.
Can you hear the audio?
Consent to this interview? I do. Thank you so much.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Very low, soft.
And did you grow up in Chennai?
No, my grandparents lived in Chennai, so my mother had gone there to deliver me. But at the time, my parents were living sort of all over the South. But we went immediately to Bangalore and then Bombay. So the 5 years that I lived in India, it was mostly in Bangalore and Bombay.
I see. Do you have any memories from that time?
I do. We actually went back recently and looked at the house that my parents had lived in Bangalore, which is now converted into an art gallery.
If you could make it a little louder, it will be nice.
Okay, so I just wanted to play just a few seconds of this, but the idea behind capturing this sort of an oral history is to provide insight into the different, lived experiences of South Asians, now who live in the US. So again, this is available openly to anybody, and I can provide the links later as well. They're included in the presentation. The second example is from the Asian Art Museum. This is a museum in San Francisco, and I worked there briefly back in 2005. And so they have a really good collection of Asian art materials. But what they've also done is they have digitized some of their collections, and they've made them available online. So if you go to their website and you click on visit the online collection, So it pulls up the items, and right now they seem to have organized it by the acquisitions, as in the items that were acquired by the museum either in 2018, 2019, 2022, or 2020. But if you look at this, the Asian Art Museum collection highlights, for example, where did it go? So for example, this beaker vase with floral scrolls. So it gives you an image of the item. It tells you the place of origin, the historical period, some of the dimensions. So if somebody was curious, or somebody was conducting research about these kinds of vases, for example, they also want to have an understanding of how small or how big these items are. And so they provide the dimensions here. They tell you what department this is from, what the object number is. And what's interesting is that this item is currently not on display in their gallery, but it is part of their collection. And so again, this is, what you might say, is a hidden object because it's in the collection, it's not in the gallery, but they're providing access to it in a digital format via their digital collection. Another example is from the British Museum. This is an object or a statue of Goddess Tara. And what this does is, so for example, this is how the object looks in the British Museum's digital library. It tells you what it is, it tells you what the object number is. It gives you a description of what this particular object is, what the cultures or the periods that this object belongs to, where it might have been produced, and this one says it was made in Sri Lanka, and also what materials were used to make it. Again, it includes dimensions, so you get an idea for size, and also what's interesting is the British Museum has made this object available and it provides the use license for this particular object. So if you click on this, use this image, it gives you information about how you can use this object. So so I'm able to use this particular image in this presentation because if this is for a non-commercial purpose, it is for an educational talk. But if I wanted to use it for commercial purposes, then I would be unable to do that. In the sense, if I wanted to make money off of this object, I won't be able to do that. And this is one of the open licenses that they've attached to this image, which allows a use or reuse of this particular image. Then this is an example of something called the South Asian American Digital Archive, or SADA. And this is an archive which is called a post-custodial archive. In the sense, what they do is they invite South Asians or South Asian American families to bring their personal papers or stories, images, what have you, to them. They digitize these objects and make them available via their digital library. And then once they finish digitization, they return the materials back to the owner. So they're not holding on to a collection of physical objects, but what they're providing access to is just the digital images. And this actually is a very interesting project that they have. And so, you should be looking at more, but insight into, again, the lived experiences of South Asian Americans in the US. So for example, people who took road trips and, they provide access to their images, for example. There are stories of the immigrants and refugees who came to the US So there are some images of those. And again, all of this requires clearance from the person who actually owns those objects. Oops, this went offline. All right, and another example is, sorry, my internet is a little slow. Okay, there is a newer project, which is the 1947 Partition Archive. And this captures, again, stories of those who took part in that great migration, between Pakistan and India at the time of the partition in 1947. And the person who started this project, I believe some of her family members took part in that migration, and she realized that nobody was capturing the stories of these people. And so this is how they're trying to provide access to those stories via this online collection. Okay, so now the next 2-3 examples are examples of how these some of these digital collections can be accessed from larger platforms. So for example, the Digital Public Library of America, or the DPLA, what it does is it provides an infrastructure where different institutions can contribute their metadata or descriptive information to their system, and you can provide access to those collections from a single site. So for example, if you look at, this is the main homepage for the DPLA. And if you click on browse by topic, there was, so that I found women in science, which I thought might be interesting to this group. So if you click on women in science, if you click on botany, for example, here is, and what did I see as an example? Okay, so what it does is, if you click on this one example, it provides the descriptive information over here, but when you click on view full item, it takes you back to the original digital library where it actually lives. So they're only providing access to the descriptive information, but if you wanted to look at the original item, you have to go back to the native environment. So this is how they provide access to this particular object. There's something in the chat. The question is, are these libraries for colleges or public libraries? They can be for both, depending on what sort of resources are available. Public libraries might have very specialized collections that they want to provide access to. Academic libraries have special collections or archives units within them. And so they also undertake digital library projects. Moving on, there is another example, which is the California Digital Libraries Calisphere. So what Calisphere does is any institution which is in the state of California in the US can contribute their content to this Calisphere platform. And again, this is like a single discovery layer for a variety of objects. And you can browse either by contributing institutions, you can look at the various collections. They also have exhibitions that they maintain on a particular website. There is also a similar platform that is available for institutions and collections in Europe, which is called Europeana. And again, similar concept to the DPLA and Calisphere, and you can again go and explore various collections that are contributed from various European countries and institutions to this platform. There's something called the Digital Library of the Caribbean. Various institutions in the different countries in the Caribbean, they use this platform to either host their digital libraries or to contribute content so that they can be discovered within this single platform as well. I realize I only have 10 more minutes, so I'll quickly go over this one particular example. So this is an example of a digital scholarship project. So what the British Library did, they looked at the records of the East India Company shipping routes, and they created this visualization. So essentially, they looked through all of those records. They created some sort of, like an Excel spreadsheet or what have you, and then they used that data to make this visualization. So no, that's not what I want. So what this does is, there's no audio for this, but this is starting from the earliest times when the ships that were sent by the British East India Company, they started coming to the east, especially to India, and as you can see, Southeast Asia. This was for the spice trade. And it's interesting to see how and they provide a date as well. So 1791, you can see there's only a couple of ships that were coming through. But if you scroll further and look at 1798, there are more ships that are coming through. If you go even further, this is now in the 1800s, there is a regular shipping trade or more ships that are going back and forth. What's also interesting is that they are going around the Cape of Good Hope in South Africa, because the Suez Canal had not been created at the time, and so you can see that they are still making their way around the continent of Africa, and they're coming to the western part of India. They're going to the eastern part as well as to Bangladesh and other countries. And then as you go later, like in the 1820s, or maybe even closer later on during that century, you can see that there are more and more ships that are going back and forth. So this was also the time when there were more of the colonists that were coming to South Asia and to Southeast Asia. And this was the beginning of their colonization in these countries. So, so digital humanities and digital scholarship, these are big projects or initiatives that many academic libraries and even, like the College of Social Studies or Humanities, they are undertaking. But I found that there is also the beginning of digital humanities at the Indian Institute of Technology in Jodhpur. They have a full program that offers graduate education in this in these areas. And the image on the right, it's an article that was published in the Digital Humanities Quarterly that talks about some of the challenges that are associated, because for digital library projects, for digital humanities projects, it requires a lot of infrastructure, it requires a lot of technical skills, and some of these challenges in terms of costs that are involved to manage and sustain them. So this is an article that will give you insight into what's happening in India. And here I found this article about the National Archives of India, and they are starting to digitize materials that are in the National Archives collection. And these will be made available via an online platform at some point. This was an article that was published in April, so I'm not sure how much progress they've made on this front. And finally, the National Museum in New Delhi, they have a digitization cell, as they call it, and they have collections that they have made available via their website. So for example, if you look at the archaeology collection, so let's look at this one. This is a Buddha from Gandhara. It again gives dimensions that it originated in Vijayanagar in South India. It gives a short description of what this particular object is. Sorry, they changed this. This is Ardhanarishwara. So there are initiatives that are being undertaken in India as well. But again, it requires a lot of resources to make these things available. And that's it. Hopefully this was insightful. I tried not to go into too many technical details, but digital library work does require a lot of that. So I'll stop here and take questions or comments if you have any.